Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the only always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor immediately before getting a much-needed haircut. I'm going to be talking about the new album by The Streets, None of Us Are Getting Out of Here Alive. And what I want to do is something kind of fun. I want to describe to you my feelings about The Streets now, then get my haircut, listen to the album for 24 hours, and answer the question that I'm wondering. Are The Streets still good? Are they still as important as I used to believe that they were? You see, their first three albums, and I say they, The Streets are just one person, Mike Skinner. I'll still say they because he wants to be called The Streets. So The Streets' first three albums in the early 2000s are a testament to the true power of hip-hop music. Now, back in the early 2000s, when I was told about them by my friend Brad, I couldn't believe it, you know? I was like, oh, he's a white British guy who's making hip-hop? This can't be, right? Rap is about the voice of the voiceless. How could that possibly be? Well, what The Streets was able to show me in a way that I think is very clear is that you can be voiceless not just by race or ethnic situation or religion. You can be voiceless due to your education and class. And The Streets was able to make three albums, absolute masterpieces, from the perspective of somebody who lived on the sort of outskirts of society in England, who was the kind of guy that I sort of knew when I lived in Europe, you know? A nice enough, kind of charming guy, probably smoked too many cigarettes, smoked too much hash, like cool enough, like sort of always feeling like he's just barely getting by. And it's funny because, you know, that kind of music's been made for a long time, all throughout the world, right? But usually it's done through rock and roll. What The Streets did that was interesting was Mike Skinner made the music that he listened to. Around the turn of the century, if you were this kind of person that I know, a nice enough, uneducated guy he reminds me a lot of my friend Nico from France, who's this chef that I knew, who was sort of just a nice enough guy, but it was very clear that he was probably not going to make it in life. And those people at that time listened to EDM, they listened to electronic dance music, and they listened to hip hop. Of course, in the past, you know, this kind of sort of working class, lower working class music was made for rock and roll. But think about rock and roll's limitations. You know, you have to have a chorus, you have to have a limited amount of words. You can say a lot, but so much of it ends up being said poetically, or you're saying a lot by saying very little. Hip-hop provides you the chance to say everything, so that every detail from these early albums that he made, specifically like having an album, like renting a video and figuring out how to get it back to the video store on time to not incur late fees. That's the kind of thing which you can't really talk about meaningfully in rock and roll without it sounding affected or fancy or just bizarre. But in hip-hop, the sheer number of words you can fit in go there. So these three albums, what made these three albums a masterpiece was the fact that he took both of these kinds of music and mixed them together. You should be familiar with hip-hop. I get always lost. I am a French professor. I am not a musicologist. I'm especially not somebody who's ever comfortable defining the differences between different kinds of electronic dance music, or techno, or electro, or spitblow, whatever it is. I don't know. So what do? I go to Wikipedia. Before you change the channel, let me tell you why I go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great for any subject that has very passionate people who are watching over it like a hawk. Any musical genre, the Wikipedia definition is the best because the people who love it are the kind of people who would be there making sure that it's right and up to date. I would go as far as to say that we should, moving this point forward, only go to Wikipedia as a kind of crowdsourced definition center for different musical genres. What do you think of that, by the way? Could you put that in the comments if you think that's a dumb idea or a good idea? So here's how they define garage music. UK garage music. A percussive maybe I could read. I could do that. A percussive, shuffled 4/4 breakbeat rhythm with syncopated hi-hats, cymbals, and snares. Sometimes includes an irregular kick drum pattern. That particular part's important. The irregular kick drum often makes you feel like garage is erratic and like something's missing. Garage tracks also commonly feature chopped up and time-stretched or pitched-shifted vocal samples complementing the underlying rhythmic structure at a tempo usually around 130 BPM, which is pretty fast. So what does that mean? It's 4/4, standard kind of fast dance music that has unsettling elements of syncopation and different sort of pitched up things and irregular kick drum patterns. On these 3 albums that Mike Skinner As the Streets made, he was able to put both these things together in a way that was just perfect. It helped to overwhelm my prejudice against the idea of white British people making hip hop and allowed me to understand, to begin my understanding of the true power of hip hop, which is international, which is beyond race, beyond class. Okay, so those are the 3 albums, masterpieces, so good, so relatable. Always with his icon, which is a kind of lighter that's used and sort of indicates maybe he smokes too much. All of them about being on the outskirts of society, and what made them amazing was they were all theme albums that connected. I was actually lucky enough to see him perform in Boston at the Avalon Ballroom with Dizzy Rascal, which is my introduction to like grime and like British hip hop that was less mainstream, right in the middle of that run. And then 2006, these first 3 albums, at that point I already had a kid. He's in the other room right now playing Animal Crossing. I already had a kid and I was kind of moving on. And I stopped paying attention to the streets right after that album, 2006. I probably bought it, listened to it like twice, and then just said, I don't know. Because how can I relate anymore? Like, I didn't live the life of the streets, but I knew people like that. I knew what it was like to be young and around people who were not making great choices and this kind of like hard scrabble life of youth. I couldn't relate to it anymore. So this is the question. I'm about to go get my haircut. And by go get my haircut, I mean my wife is going to cut my hair in the basement. So this might be the best my hair looks for a couple weeks. We'll have to see. Just a little off the top. I'm going to listen to this album for the next 24 hours and record the second half of this video. And these are my questions. He's old. He's 40 at least. He must be at least 40, okay? Will his music still have any resonance, right? And he's not at the outskirts of society. He's a big star. I mean, he's a big, important music star. Can he make that transition like so few rappers can? When the voiceless get a voice, often what they say after that point lacks depth, meaning, and importance, and just sounds inauthentic. That's why artists like, Jay-Z rapping about the woes of having to buy property is actually better than him still talking about selling crack, which he hasn't had to do for decades. Can he make that transition to adulthood in an interesting way? And then the other main problem is I am used to the experience of listening to the streets as putting on an album and listening and just knowing that there's going to be a whole story told from start to finish, and it's going to be satisfying and moving, and I'm going to feel like I'm spending a day with Mike Skinner. This, according to the liner notes, is a mixtape. The great 2000s cop-out of saying, hey, I didn't want to make an album. It's like an album. Mixtapes are like when you're in a relationship and you're too afraid to call yourselves boyfriends and girlfriend, Like we see each other and we're not dating other people and we've been seeing each other for like 6 months, but she's not my girlfriend. Like, just commit. So the idea, whenever anyone calls anything a mixtape, it means you're supposed to take your expectations down. I'm not supposed to think this is, Grand Doesn't Come for Free or any of his other albums. I'm supposed to take my expectations down. Will it work? Come back after the haircut to see. Will Mike Skinner's The Streets album from 2020 be okay, even though it's a mixtape made by an old man and not a concept album made by a young one? The answer is yes. The Streets are still actually great. Matter of fact, immediately before the haircut, right after I hit stop, my wife was watching YouTube videos about how to give haircuts. I went over to the couch in the other room and I sat down next to my son, and he was listening to the whole first half and said, "Man, pretty good, Dad." And then he was playing Animal Crossing, and we listened to the entire Streets album all the way through. And at maybe 3 or 4 times, he's like, "Dad, I really like this. This is really good." And he's right. And he's someone who had never heard the Streets. And I kept on trying to explain to him, like, oh, you should really hear his first 3 albums. They're really spectacular. Oh, they're really great. But then eventually I just stopped, because this really has the same brilliance as his early work. With the exception of the cohesion of the theme album, this has everything that makes the Streets the Streets. It's so good, it made me regret that I haven't paid attention to him since my son, who was playing Animal Crossing, was 1 year old. Musically, he's still the same awesome combination of garage. And I should also say that there was some song or something where my friend Brad, who introduced me to a lot of British music, the way he says garage is he just goes garage, 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 garage. So it's a good combination of hip hop and garage, 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 garage. It's still there, even though he must be a multimillionaire by now, and he could afford great production and sweeping orchestral this. It still feels very much like some guy in his room by himself, working together, getting some ideas out and making some interesting music. In general, every song follows the same basic pattern, which is there'll be a title. And much like the Smiths, the Streets is in love with very long, provocative titles. So there'll be a title that says everything that the song is going to say, and then usually that very long title, or that title and one more line, will be sung as a chorus very quickly over and over and over again. Sometimes with like a reggae vibe, sometimes with just kind of like a house techno feel. But that's the sort of the hook to every song. And then you have lots of space. The Streets gives himself space to just release all of those words that he has with his weird flow. Just to illustrate the style, before I go into a track-by-track analysis, let's listen to 14 seconds of I Wished You Loved You As Much As You Love Him. You can hear this great kind of chorus sung over again, and the voice underneath, and the space that he gives, and the energy, and the tempo, and the rawness, and the enjoyability. So let's listen to that for 14 seconds, starting now.
Alone. I know he says he'll change, but maybe you should know that people never change, they're just exposed. I wish you loved you as much as you love him.
I wrote down in my notes, I don't have a script, I have notes, that he has kind of an anti-flow. It's like, the way that he raps, it's like he isn't thinking at all how to sound smooth. It's like he's just constantly saying things and just getting the words out. And the fact that it's kind of stilted and doesn't quite sound right all the time is part of his charm and part of his flow. It's like he has pains to get the words out. And the words themselves, I would say, even more than the combination of hip-hop and garage, even more than that, it's the lyrical brilliance. He really, truly is a masterful lyric writer. Now, he maybe relies a little bit too much on wit, on like kind of being clever, but still, he makes these realizations. And much like when he was younger and he made realizations about how life was about having to return a videotape on time, he's able to make realizations about not really old age. He's not like, I take my kids to the daycare. Well, none of that. But the difficulty of adult relationships, I'd say that's one of the primary themes of this album. And just the difficulties of coming to terms with your own mortality, and he's able to do it in a way, and I'm going to quote him several times on the album so you can hear it, just how witty and interesting he is. Like, he says lyrics that make you say, damn, yeah, and not everyone can do that. A mixtape. Let's get back to that little problem. Yes, this is a mixtape. This is not a single story. I would say that there are probably actually 3 themes. Now, the title of the album is misleading, I would say. None of us are getting out of this alive. I'm going to talk about that when I talk about the actual song, None of Us Are Getting Out of This Life Alive. But that makes you think it's going to be about existentialism, which it is a little bit. As I said previously, a lot of this seems to be about the difficulty of bad relationships. But I think there is, hidden within this mixtape, an actual theme album. And the central theme is phones. It's phones that dominate this album. It's phones that keep coming back. And in particular, the ability that new technologies give us to ignore each other. The passive-aggressive art of modern technology. It's like he's trying to describe the other side of being ghosted, like how to be a ghoster. And I would say that the passive aggressivity of modern technology in this album reflects the emptiness of our existence. And it reflects the enduring refusal to make human connections that bring us true happiness. So the refusal to make those connections has existed forever. You know, I mean, the Kinks like dedicated a lot of their catalog to this, right? Just people who live lives and refuse to make those kinds of connections. But in this album, it's the phone that keeps on coming back and showing you the way that we can be distracted and not connect with people who want to connect with us. I don't know. If I had one complaint about the album, it's that I wish that he went full in on that. I wish that he called this album, I don't know, My Phone's Dead, So I Need to Find a Charger. Something ridiculously long like that. And bring us in on that. But as it stands, he leaves enough breadcrumbs. There's enough, not breadcrumbs. Maybe it is breadcrumbs. Maybe it is. Maybe that's the labyrinth of this album. He makes enough references here or there. He drops them in so that if you're paying attention and you're just listening for references to modern technology in the form of a smartphone, I would show you a smartphone, but I'm using my smartphone to record this video. I would say that the smartphone is the real connective tissue of this album. Speaking of which, let's get to track number 1 as I go track by track in my pink Citroën. The first track is called Call My Phone Thinking I'm Doing Nothing Better. Perfect example of a street style song because that line is repeated over and over again. He then says, I'm just waiting for it to stop so I can use it. And that is an experience that we've all had, right? Someone calls you, I can't deal with this now. I can't deal with this now. And you have to wait. And that moment of time where you're waiting to use your phone when someone else is trying to call you is the great moment of modern alienation. Somebody is literally reaching out to connect to you, and you're so frustrated because you have to wait to think about something that doesn't care about you. Someone cares about you, screw them. I want to just look up what I'm looking up. I want to see what I'm seeing. I want to scroll through what I'm scrolling through. This is also a sort of a thesis statement or a statement about the album itself because it is so minimalist. It's basically just a drum. And there's maybe some piano in the background, but it's basically just drums and voice. And then, as you can tell by the mysteriously appearing poster in the back, Tame Impala makes an appearance. So we have 2 bands that are just one people collaborating. It's the Streets with Tame Impala. 2 whole people. But it's nice having his voice on there. Apparently he's a big fan. And it does lend the whole album it makes it feel grander because you have this great genius of modern music showing up and giving his approval. But it also helps to set up this album where you have Tame Impala on and you think, is this going to be some kind of far out psychedelic big difference change for the Streets? No, it's just more street songs. I will say there's a fair number of obscure lyrics on this album that I can't quite place or understand. Like he talks about in this album, a Brexit breakfast. I don't know what that means. I sort of get what that means, but there's a lot of lines like that where most of the time he's saying things where I go, oh, smart. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, my favorite lyric on the album, and actually this might be, if I could give an alternate title to this album, excuse me, I just woke up. If I could give an alternate title to this album, it would be this following lyric. You know I'd give you my kidney, just don't take my charger. You know I'd give you my kidney, just don't take my charger. This is it. This is another one of these lyrics, which, as a teacher, when people ask me in 30 years, when I'm Professor Emeritus, and they say, hey, how would you describe 2020? You know I'd give you my kidney, just don't take my charger. That is how so many people feel. They would give people anything. But that reliance on the phone charger, that desperation, that need, that greed, that frustration, you know? I mean, if you have kids, like I have kids, you don't have a charger. You thought you had a charger, you don't. My kids buy houses by themselves, take my chargers, put them in different sockets in that house, and then burn the house every day. True story. But this feeling of just like, I would give you anything except for this small thing, The Streets has really done it. Just for this one line, I suggest you listen to this album, buy it, and process it. It's just wonderful. Then we get on to the next track, None of Us Are Getting Out of This Life Alive. This is featuring someone called The Idols. I don't know who they are. So in case you don't know, I am a real professor. You don't need to put that in quotes. But I'm not a real music critic. So there's tons of stuff I don't know, and I'm very happy to not know things. So if there's something I don't know, if you want to correct me on something, just feel free. You can even be rude about it, especially if you're a Bob Dylan fan. Those people hate me. But just go ahead and correct me or explain things to me, like who the Idols are. This track, before I get into the existential thematics and all that, I like it as well because it's the most industrial and unpleasant song. It gets very violent. It ends with like actual drumming, and it's really a lot more of that kind of garage, a very strong, angry feeling. It starts off with him just saying, I don't like my country. And then lots of interesting lyrics in there. Some people drink to be interesting. Some people drink to be interested, which is great. I ended up giving a long speech to my kids yesterday about Juice WRLD and about the nature of drugs and why people do drugs. And this basically said it better than I could. And then we have the title. Now the title, I don't know if it's intentionally a reference to Hank Williams. Hank Williams has the great song, Never Get Out of This World Alive. No matter how I struggle and I strive, I'll never get out of this world alive. Beautiful song. The song that got me to like Hank Williams, and I now have his complete biography and everything. I do think that this kind of expression comes from his middle age. I do think this is kind of a middle-aged song because he's feeling this sense of how, you know, when you're at middle age, you're closer to death than you are to life, and you kind of understand that. And I get that sense in this song that none of us are getting out of this life alive. He's feeling that he's not just trapped by circumstances or by the video store, right? He's trapped by existence itself. And I think it's important that towards the end of the song, his voice actually gets noticeably weaker. I think he's trying to emphasize this state of powerlessness. Next track is another beautiful title, I Wish You Loved You As Much As You Love Him. Which already, I wish I could go back and play this for friends of mine who were in bad relationships. I wish you loved you as much as you love him. It tells the entire story of the song, just in that title. The song itself is almost like, it's almost like a non-song. It's just so catchy and repetitive and beautiful. Do, 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 do. Wish you loved you as much as you love him. Do, 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 do. I wish you loved you as much as you love him. It's a great example of the way that he can craft these really catchy poppy songs, despite the fact that it just sounds absolutely bizarre. Another great example of the truths that the streets are able to get to. People never change, they are just exposed. Ah, ouch. Mr. The Streets, you're giving me a headache. That's a good truth bomb, right? People never change, they're just exposed. There's a lot of lyrics like this, which you could just sit back and think about for a long time. There's a nice chorus as well that's like someone else who I never heard of, Greta Peng, shows up and sings a nice kind of chorus. And when she comes in, the raw sounds are backed up by nicer keyboards, and it's quite good. The next track, You Can't Afford Me, emphasizes again the term you'll never get out of this life alive. It comes back. Sorry, I just love Hank Williams. I gotta reread this book. It's a good biography. That comes through again, which proposes the idea that this mixtape is actually just a mix of these two themes, maybe three themes together. His style is just so raw, so wonderful. This is really where I got the concept of the anti-flow, just the way that he's rapping this whole time. It has a cool kind of like glitched out horns, the way that it's made. There's a really nice guest verse by Miss Banks. And then there's this great line by the Streets, and he does this thing which again is something that Morrissey will often do, where he'll make a small grammatical mistake to fit a rhyme, but it doesn't just do it to fit the rhyme, he also does it to bring attention to the severity or the importance of what he's saying. You make problems with people so that you can push them away, so that they can leave you before you leave they. Great line. Again, if I was younger and I could go back in time and talk to so many people I know who are like this, I now try not to be friends with people who push people away. It's too much work. But still, this is a great line. A great line of human truth, and Mike Skinner's getting to it in the middle of this really nicely put together combination of hip hop and garage. Oh my God, I hope that it actually is garage. If garage is like some other genre and I don't know, just let me know in the comments. I know something you did, but I can't say how, is the low point on the album. It's not terrible. There's some nice bass work on it, cool kind of like organs going on here. It's kind of a story song. I don't really know what it is. I have thought that way before, you know, like if you've ever been in a bad relationship, you often find out things in ways that you don't want to share with your partner, but I'm not sure it's a full song. The next track, Eskimo Ice, is another kind of, I wouldn't call it a low light, but no, it is. It's a low light on a very strong album, so it's still a good song, but it's not as good as the rest. Again, though, this whole concept of letting the phone die gets in here. It seems to be about that he has a guest person singing the chorus. It seems to be about like doing regrettable things, you know, like sleeping with your friend's wife. But then I don't know, like at some point he starts talking about like if God drops acid, does he see people? This is an example of being too clever, I think. So when you're making observations about, you know, I would give you my kidney but not your cell phone charger, you're saying something really true. If you're saying, does God take acid and see people, you're just making a dumb point. Like, that's just kind of a bad joke. So, I'm sorry, the streets, not a big fan. This is the only time in the album where Mike Skinner says, oi, which is something that I believe he did a lot earlier, or at least people from, you know, like that's the emphasis of his music, the sound of his music is someone going, oi. So, next track is Phone Is Always in My Hand, which is a very happy soundscape, kind of bright synthesizers. The drums are a little bit less difficult, a little bit less syncopated, and even the singing is clearer. It actually makes me think of a friend of mine, Yehuda, who is always later than he says, and there's a line in this song, if I say I'm 5 minutes away and you believe me, that's your problem. And you know, it's a silly, funny line, but it's also true. If people act consistently, and they consistently disappoint you, and they say they're not going to disappoint you the next time, that's your fault. That's your fault for being fooled. That's this other whole theme. Jeez, I'm sorry, I'm going off the top of my head here, but I'm pretty sure that that's this whole other theme, that like, people tell you what they're going to do, and you need to believe them, and you need to let them, like, if someone's ignoring you, it's because they're ignoring you. If someone's always late, it's because they're always late. Like, you shouldn't fool yourself into believing more in people than they are asking you to believe in them. Is that a fourth theme? I don't know. Maybe that fits into this whole third theme of just the difficulty of adult relationships and people not being able to change, just be exposed. It's really quite nice. This has the best guest rap verse on the album. Probably actually the best featuring. I mean, I love Tame Impala, but I mean, that was fun having Tame Impala on there. I'm not sure if it brought as much, but this one by someone named Daps on the Maps actually fits within the theme, like really well. Like he raps about maybe I'll let my phone die. And what's cool here is the streets, you know, he produces everything and raps on everything. So that's one of my favorite things about him. He actually reverses the keyboard sound on the guest verse. And he often does this. He'll leave some kind of key or hint or something that indicates that there's a different sound coming. There's kind of a misogynistic joke to end the song. Don't try to understand ladies, brother. Ladies understand ladies and they hate each other. I would say there's a couple kind of misogynist themes on here, like if you feel down, I'll feel you up, which felt better when he was younger and dumber. And now it's getting a little bit close to the old guy in the bar who thinks that he can, you know, hug women when they don't want him to. I mean, not that bad, but that's maybe one bit where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's funny and that's clever, but like, yeah. But you know what? Maybe I'm expecting too much growth. Maybe the streets told us what the streets is in 2002, and we need to believe them. The next track, The Poison I Take, Hoping You Will Suffer. Again, He just comes up with these great lines and then gives them to us, and even just the titles. Even if you just read the titles to this album, you would be a richer person. Your emotional life would be richer. The poison I take, hoping you will suffer. And this has probably the most interesting soundscape, kind of like a thumpy bass and kind of droning sounds. It's all about, like, I thought it was about drugs and recidivism, but I don't think it's actually about drugs. I think it's about the difficulty of middle age. I think it's a lot about, like, making decisions and not being able to stand by them, trying to end relationships but not being able to. These next two tracks, this one and the next one, seem to be about, like, wanting to get out of a relationship that's not working. Maybe that's not middle age. Maybe I wrote that down in my notes and then I said it, but then I didn't follow it up and it doesn't work. I'm not gonna edit it. I had some of my favorite lines here. He talks about it being, the weather where I wear a coat in the morning, I regret in the afternoon. Plans always become dead. I told you I'd come along for the jokes, but that was 2 hours ago. I was younger then. I was full of hope. And that's a theme that comes on this album multiple times, is he talks about his past self and his future self, and like the regret of the future, like predicting the regret of the future or announcing the regret of the present about what just happened in the past. But it's this nice idea of sort of a metaphor for this relationship, right? The coat, I wear the coat in the morning, I regret it in the afternoon. But he's stuck with the coat, which then leads into the next track, Same Direction, which is another great breakup song. I like to go we all say goodbye and then we walk in the same direction. If she can't move on, that's her problem. I'm good, that's her delay. We both say goodbye, but then walk in the same direction. This track has some more guest vocalists. At this point, I stopped writing down names of random British people I'd never heard of in my notes. So I'm sure they're great, whoever they are. But this is really good guest vocals, and I don't remember a lot of guest vocals on the earlier stuff that I liked of by The Streets, but The Streets uses them really well. The Streets is a great artist who knows how to use things properly, and with the exception of maybe one or two times, every guest appearance sounded excellent, like precise, really what you wanted. So that's really quite nice. Then we have the track Falling Down, which is, I think, his attempt at kind of a pop song, or as close as he will get to a pop song. Catchy piano. Actually, yeah. And when you fail, they rejoice. Falling down is an accident. Staying down is a choice. They say that over and over and over and over again and over again. But it's a great line. But I mean, it's a little bit cheesy, right? Right? It's cheesy. I'm sorry, The Streets, but it's cheesy. Falling down is an accident, staying down is a choice, right? I mean, that could be like written on a t-shirt that you see at an amusement park. You know what I'm saying? But like, it's cool because then he goes into it and he develops it. And the song itself develops really quite well. There's a certain point where he says, fall in love with the girl who makes you love the guy that... And then he trails off, and then the music gets a lot richer. And this is, I would say, the biggest sign that maybe The Streets wants to do more developed things, a little bit less raw, but he holds himself back. There's also a weird guest verse on here by Hack Baker. And this is weird because this guy is doing a Streets verse. But he's doing a Streets verse from like 20 years ago. Like, he uses like slang, like he says oi 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 all the time and says blimey. He talks about like hanging out with losers and like having to like steal the little petty crimes to get by. It's this weird thing where you feel like The Streets looked for somebody who was just like he was 20 years ago to put him in the middle of this song, which is better than him pretending that that's his life. The next track, Conspiracy Theory Freestyle. This is a good one because I listened to it and I didn't like it that much, and I said I didn't like it that much, and my son was like, no, this is good. So he was right. Kind of a slower flow. There's a multiple female voices singing at one point. The line that keeps going over and over again is, you know the truth like your phone knows the time. And this ends up becoming a song about the difficulty of accepting the truth and the difficulty of accepting sort of the regular truths of life, and it puts them in question. It's kind of the more cosmic aspect of this album. And he even talks about like adulthood, right? Like, he talks this whole thing about like when it's adult to drink beer at night but then drink water in the morning. That's what makes you an adult. And then he makes this beautiful line about the way life is and how he compares it to when you fall asleep in your parents' bed but wake up in yours, which is an oddly sweet, honest detail of life, right? I mean, we've all fallen asleep in our parents' bed and then woken up in ours. What happens in that time? Like, the streets makes that some mystical moment. And then it ends in this kind of funny, intentionally ironic way, I hope, where he talks about the world is round so that we can't look too far down the line unless it's flat. And it talks about, I don't really know why that is. I think he's just trying to be funny. And then the album ends with the track Take Me As I Am, the most club-sounding song. It sounds like it's in a club. It's about being in a club. It's about wanting a woman. Again, a little bit of that sort of semi-misogynist stuff. Take Me As I Am or Watch Me As I Go. It's a song about courtship in the club. So, and it's got just another great catchy line repeated over and over again. And then the voices underneath happening, the kind of mundane daily life happening underneath this cool, interesting chorus. Again, he makes reference to future me. And that ends up being like one of the other themes of forward and backwards. So there you go. There is the Streets album, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. What's it called again? None of us are getting out of this world alive. Very positive, feel very good about it. I did the thing. Feel free to tell me what you think about the haircut. I mean, I think it looks good. If you think it looks bad, you get what you pay for. It's free. But I should have done a thing where I recorded something like then so that it looks like, I go back and forth between having the haircut and not, like a common etiquette thing. But instead, I recorded the beginning like 3 times yesterday, and I kept on making mistakes. So I'll include that here. Well, until next time, there's, for I don't know, Hank Williams. There's the camera. Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's record review. You are a poop snap. Thank you for auditing. I'm licking my lips.